"That's not your seat." The words weren't a question. They were a verdict delivered with a clinical coldness that sliced through the hushed, privileged air of the Flagship first-class cabin. Elias Vance slowly looked up from the dense pages of a merger proposal. The refined scent of stitched leather and recycled, filtered air suddenly felt suffocating. He'd spent a week in New York fighting battles in boardrooms just as airless as this, and all he had wanted was the cocoon of Seat 2, a space he had paid for, earned, to simply be left alone. But peace was not on the manifest for him. Not today. The familiar, cold jolt shot down his spine. It wasn't pain. Pain was temporary. This was exhaustion, a soul-deep weariness that came from the lifelong burden of having to justify his own existence. Standing before him was Brenda Davies, a flight attendant whose blonde hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to prevent any emotion from escaping. Her arms were crossed, a physical barrier, her chin tilted in a posture of petty authority, wielded with absolute conviction. Behind Brenda, in Elias's line of sight, stood Chadwick Chad Harrington III. He didn't need to speak. His entire being was a statement. The bespoke suit, the perfectly gelled hair, and the Patek Philippe on his wrist, which he tapped impatiently against the polished chrome of a divider. He let out a theatrical sigh, an acoustic performance meant to signal to everyone nearby that his valuable time was being wasted. Elias said nothing. He simply looked. He looked at Brenda, who was looking down at him with judgment. Then his gaze flickered to Chad, who was pointedly looking away with an air of disdain. Elias's calm seemed to unnerve Brenda more than any argument would have. He deliberately reached into his jacket and produced his boarding pass, the crisp white paper bearing the stark, clear text. Vance, Elias. Seat 2A. "Ma'am, this is my seat," he said, his voice low and steady, a voice accustomed to negotiating billion-dollar deals. "Here." It carried no weight. Brenda snatched the ticket from his hand. Her eyes scanned it for less than a second. "Anyone can print these," she said, her tone dripping with insinuation. She then jerked a thumb toward Chad. "This gentleman paid full fare for first class. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your things and move to the back of the plane. Where you belong. Where do you belong?" The last three words hung in the air, venomous and heavy. This was no longer about a seat. This was a reinforcement of social order. The cabin atmosphere thickened. The clinking of crystal glasses from the galley suddenly stopped. In seat 3B, Maya Lin, a young woman with sharp, observant eyes, quietly unlocked her iPhone. The Instagram Live icon pulsed once, then went live with a silent, defiant glow. The viewer count jumped from 3 to 15. The caption she typed was swift and brutal. "Blatant discrimination on AA Flagship flight right now." An elderly couple across the aisle whispered anxiously, their faces a mask of discomfort. A businessman in 4C, who had been typing furiously on his laptop, shook his head in disgust, but quickly turned back to his screen, wanting no part of the confrontation. The crowd had become a jury of silent accomplices. Anger, hot and familiar, began to simmer in Elias's chest. But he had learned long ago that a black man's anger was a weapon others could use against him. He took a slow, deep breath, pressing it down. He reached into his leather briefcase again, this time retrieving a sleek, matte black card. American Airlines Executive Platinum. His name was embossed below it in silver. "Ma'am, I have been an Executive Platinum member for 8 years. This is definitely my seat." Brenda scoffed, an ugly sound. "Fakes are very sophisticated these days. I see them all the time. Security is getting very good at catching these fraudulent upgrades." She didn't even glance at the card, as if its very existence was an insult to her intelligence. The captain's voice came over the intercom, polite but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now completing our final checks. We are scheduled for an on-time departure in 15 minutes. The announcement was a catalyst for Brenda. Her authority had been challenged in front of her passengers, and Elias's composure was a personal affront. She needed to end this. Her voice hardened, pitched to carry through the cabin in a public display of control. "Sir, this is the last time I'm going to ask. We have a legitimate passenger waiting, and you are delaying this entire aircraft. Either you move voluntarily, or airport security will remove you from this plane. The threat hung in the air, cold and unambiguous. Elias sat there, framed by the cabin lights and dozens of watching eyes, an island of one in a hostile sea. On Maya's phone screen, the viewer count had just passed 800. His humiliation was now being broadcast to the world, and the cruel theater had only just begun. Brenda's threat was not just a statement. It was an activation. She reached for the radio on her shoulder, her finger pressing the button with a decisive, self-satisfied click. Flagship cabin to ground control. We have a code 7 Delta situation. The passenger in 2A is refusing to comply with crew instructions, requesting lead flight attendant and security assistance. 7 Delta. A harmless-sounding code, but in the sterile language of the airline industry, it transformed Elias from a customer into a threat. He was no longer a person. He was a problem to be solved. Minutes later, Robert Miller appeared. He was the lead flight attendant, a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed mustache and the weary expression of someone who saw the world only in terms of metrics. Departure times, on-time percentages, fuel costs. He walked up, his eyes gliding past Elias without truly seeing him, and settled on Brenda. He didn't ask Elias for his side of the story. He asked Brenda, "What's the problem?" "This passenger is occupying a seat belonging to a full-fare customer," Brenda reported, her voice laced with the tone of a victim. "He's presenting invalid documents and refuses to move, delaying our entire flight." It was a perfect summary of a distorted reality. Robert Miller nodded, accepting it as fact. He turned to Elias, but his tone wasn't one of inquiry. It was one of command. "Sir," he began, his voice as flat as a pre-recorded announcement. "Our airline's policy in cases of seating disputes is very clear. To avoid delaying the flight, passengers are required to comply with the crew's temporary arrangements. Any complaints you have can be addressed by our customer service department after we land. Policy, procedure." The words were erected like an invisible wall, a fortress that reason could not penetrate. Elias could feel the trap closing. He wasn't arguing with a person anymore. He was arguing with a rulebook, a system designed to protect itself at all costs. As Robert Miller spoke, Airport Security Officer Isabella Rossi arrived. She was petite but walked with a commanding presence, her uniform immediately creating a perimeter of authority around them. Her eyes took in the scene. The well-dressed black man, seated calmly, the 2 white crew members towering over him, and the other white passenger smirking from the very seat in question. Years on the airport beat had taught her that what she saw and what was reported were often 2 entirely different stories. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice professional but not cold. Before Elias could speak, Robert interjected. "Officer, we have a non-compliant passenger. We've asked him to move, and he has refused. Per FAA regulations, the flight crew has final authority in the cabin. We need your assistance to escort him off the aircraft." Rossi looked at Elias. "Sir, may I see your documents, please?" For the 3rd time, Elias presented his boarding pass and his membership card. Officer Rossi examined them thoroughly, unlike Brenda. She turned them over, scanned the barcodes, and compared the names. Everything was perfect. She looked up, meeting Robert Miller's gaze directly. "Sir, all of this documentation appears to be perfectly valid." A flicker of hope sparked in Elias, only to be immediately extinguished. "It doesn't matter," Robert snapped, his patience worn thin. "Policy is policy. The crew's decision is final. He is being disruptive, and we're about to miss our takeoff window." Officer Rossi was caught. She knew Robert was abusing his authority. She could see the discrimination playing out before her eyes. But she also knew the law. In the cabin of an aircraft, the lead flight attendant's word was nearly absolute. Her eyes met Elias's, a silent moment of helpless empathy. She had to follow the order. "I'm sorry," her gaze seemed to say. On Maya Lin's livestream, the viewer count had hit 27,000. The hashtag flagship fail was now the #1 trending topic in the United States. Comments poured in like a tidal wave. "What year is this? Boycott American Airlines." Someone get the flight number. And then, the most brutal moment of all. Chadwick Harrington 3, now comfortably settled in seat 2A, flagged down another flight attendant and ordered a glass of champagne. The act, in this context, was a final, triumphant insult. It was captured in full view of Maya's camera. A moment later, he muttered, just loud enough for her and the phone's sensitive microphone to pick up, finally. Some people just need to learn their place. The phrase landed like a nuclear bomb on social media. This was no longer a seating mix-up. It was a declaration of class and race. Officer Rossi stepped closer to Elias, her voice low. Sir, please cooperate with me. I know this isn't right, but fighting here, right now, isn't going to help you. Elias looked at her, then at Robert, at Brenda, and finally at Chad, who was sipping his champagne with a look of pure satisfaction. He had lost. The system had won. The truth had no value here. He slowly stood up. He picked up his Hartmann leather briefcase. A feeling of hollowness enveloped him. Brenda and Robert couldn't hide their triumphant expressions. For them, order had been restored. The problem had been removed. As Elias walked away with Officer Rossi, he heard Brenda say to another passenger, See, all it takes is a little firmness. For every passenger on that plane, and for the tens of thousands watching online, it was a bitter failure of justice. Elias Vance, a successful businessman, had just been treated like a criminal and ejected from a place where he had every right to be. He had been defeated by a wall of prejudice and bureaucracy. He had lost his dignity in front of the entire world. At the threshold of the aircraft, where the stale cabin air met the cold, metallic breeze of the jet bridge, Elias Vance stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. He just stood there, his back to his accusers. 1 second, 2, 3. His stillness suddenly carried a different kind of weight, a heaviness that made Robert Miller and Brenda Davies, who had been preparing to turn away with relief, freeze in their tracks. Then he slowly pivoted. His eyes no longer held exhaustion or humiliation. They were sharp, cold, and calculating. He didn't look at Brenda or Robert. He looked directly at Officer Rossi. Officer, he said, his voice even and clear, without a trace of a tremor. Thank you for your professionalism in a difficult situation. It will be noted. The polite, unexpected words confused everyone. They were not the words of a defeated man. Elias placed his Hartmann leather briefcase on a nearby vacant seat. He didn't open it hastily. He deliberately undid the 2 polished brass latches. The click of each one echoed in the dead silence. He didn't reach for a phone or a wallet. He retrieved a sleek, matte black business card case. With a precise motion, he took out a single card and extended it to Robert Miller. Robert, by mechanical reflex, took it. He glanced down at the card. His eyes narrowed. He read it, then blinked, reading it again as if he couldn't process the words. The heavy cardstock, the silver embossed letters gleaming under the cabin lights. Elias Vance, founding partner and CEO. Vance Capital. Vance Capital? Robert whispered the name a phantom in his mind. He'd heard it somewhere, in high-level meetings, on quarterly financial reports. It wasn't just a firm. It was a Wall Street powerhouse. His smug expression began to contort, shifting from confusion to a vague, dawning horror. Elias didn't give him time to process. His voice had now shed all warmth, becoming as sharp as a scalpel. Robert, I suggest you use your phone and call the CEO of the parent corporation. Right now. Don't call your direct supervisor. Call John Fitzpatrick himself. Tell him that Project Nightingale has been activated. Elias paused for a beat, letting the cryptic names sink in. And tell him that his airline has just failed its first field test. Spectacularly. He turned back to his briefcase, this time withdrawing a slim portfolio bound in dark blue leather. The cover was stamped with the words "Strictly Confidential" and the Vance Capital logo. This was not something a normal passenger carried. Elias held the portfolio in his hand, his voice now resonating through the stunned, silent cabin. Every passenger was holding their breath. Every phone was pointed at him. The viewer count on Maya Lin's live stream exploded past 100,000. Let me clarify for all of you, Elias continued, so there is no misunderstanding. Vance Capital recently led an impact investing consortium to acquire a 35% voting stake in your parent company. A $2.8 billion transaction. A horrified gasp escaped from Brenda. The color drained from her face. She had to grip the back of the seat to keep herself steady. A non-negotiable clause in that deal, Elias went on, flipping open the first page of the portfolio, was a comprehensive, independent, and unannounced audit of your diversity, equity, and inclusion policies across the entire system. We wanted to see if your commitments on paper were practiced in reality. He raised his head, his gaze sweeping over each stunned face. Brenda, Robert, and finally Chadwick Harrington III, who was frozen in seat 2A, the champagne glass in his hand, now looking absurd and pathetic. And then Elias delivered the final blow. "This flight, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice dropping to a low, powerful register. It was not a normal flight. This flight is the audit. The truth landed in the cabin like a bomb. Everything had changed. They hadn't just humiliated a black passenger. They had catastrophically failed a multi-billion-dollar test in front of one of the company's most powerful new owners. Their every action, the contempt, the abuse of power, the racist remarks, had all been documented, not just by a phone, but as part of an official corporate audit. Robert Miller fumbled for his phone, his fingers slipping on the screen. Brenda looked like she was about to faint. Chad Harrington III realized that he hadn't just insulted a stranger. He had personally insulted the man who now held his and possibly his family's company's fate in his hands. The stage was reset. The lights were the same, but the roles had been reversed. Elias Vance was no longer the victim. He was the prosecutor, judge, and jury. He pulled his tablet from his briefcase, the screen flaring to life with charts and dancing numbers. "Now," he said, his voice as cold as ice, turning the screen toward Robert. "Let's talk about fiduciary responsibility and the immediate financial consequences of your actions tonight." The first-class cabin was no longer a luxury space. It had become a courtroom, an emergency boardroom at 35,000 feet, and Elias Vance was presiding. He no longer spoke of feelings or humiliation. He spoke the only language a multi-billion-dollar corporation truly understands, the language of money and power. "Mr. Miller," Elias began, his voice flat, each word a hammer blow. He aimed the tablet screen at the ashen-faced lead flight attendant. "This is the after-hours trading chart for your parent company's stock. News of the incident on this flight, documented by several 100,000 people, has already begun to leak onto investor forums. In the last 15 minutes, the stock has lost 4.7% of its value." He paused, letting the numbers sink in. "Let me translate that for you. Your actions, in less than an hour, have erased approximately $840 million of this company's market capitalization. And the night has just begun." Robert Miller looked as if he was going to be physically sick. The number, cold and brutal, was more damaging than any moral accusation. Elias didn't stop. He shifted into the role of adjudicator, dispensing fates one by one. His voice remained unervingly calm, which only made it more terrifying. He looked directly at Brenda Davies. "Ms. Davies, Project Nightingale grants us access to internal personnel files. We've reviewed yours. There have been 17 prior complaints of discriminatory behavior from passengers in the last 3 years. 17. All of them were dismissed or handled superficially. You are not a single mistake. You are a systemic failure. Your employment with this airline is terminated, effective immediately. With this record, I will personally ensure you never work for another carrier in our alliance again. Your career in this industry is over." Brenda's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Her world had just been dismantled in a single sentence. Next, Elias turned to Robert Miller. "Mr. Miller, as a ranking manager on site, ultimate responsibility falls to you. You failed to protect your customer, you failed to uphold the basic principles of decency, and, most importantly to the board, you failed to protect the assets of your shareholders. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately. Your position will be reviewed by a new ethics committee that my fund will be establishing. You have proven yourself to be an incompetent manager." Finally, Elias's gaze swept past Chadwick Harrington III, who was trying to shrink into seat 2A as if to become invisible. Elias didn't even need to address him directly. He spoke to Robert, but the words were aimed like a sniper's bullet at Chad. And the gentleman in seat 2A. Harrington Global's corporate travel account, his family's company, will be permanently terminated across our entire airline alliance and its partners. The video of his Learn Their Place comment will be sent directly to their full board of directors at 9 a.m. tomorrow, along with a detailed analysis of the brand risk he, as an heir, now poses to them. I wish him luck at his next family meeting. It was a surgical strike, aimed not just at Chad, but at the very foundation of his power, his family, and their wealth. At that exact moment, Robert's phone rang. The screen displayed the name John Fitzpatrick, CEO. Robert shakily handed the phone to Elias, as if it were a venomous snake. Elias took it. "John, it's Elias Vance." "No, I'm not interested in your apology. I am interested in your compliance." Elias listened for a moment, then cut him off. "This is what is going to happen, John, and you may want to record this." Elias began to read a list of non-negotiable demands, the Vance mandates, with the clarity of a lawyer reading an indictment. A $100 million fund, established immediately to compensate past victims of discrimination and to fund DEI initiatives. The formation of an independent civil rights office within 30 days, led by a civil rights attorney approved by Vance Capital, with the power to terminate any employee. All 50,000 employees, from ground crew to pilots, will complete a mandatory anti-bias training program within 6 months. A public apology from you, John, to be broadcast on national television during prime time tomorrow evening. That apology will specifically mention the events on this flight and commit to these changes. You have 1 hour for your legal team to send an unconditional letter of acceptance to my email, Elias concluded. If not, my fund will officially launch a proxy fight to remove your entire board of directors when the market opens. The choice is yours. He ended the call and handed the phone back to Robert. The cabin was utterly silent. Elias placed his tablet and portfolio back into his briefcase with chilling calm. The judgment was complete. He looked towards seat 2A, where Chadwick Harrington III sat, petrified. Then he turned to Officer Rossi, who had stood by, stunned by the display of power she had just witnessed. His voice softened. "Officer, if you don't mind," he said, "I'd like to take my seat. The audit is over." Not a word of protest was uttered. Elias walked past the spectral forms of Brenda and Robert. He stopped before seat 2A. Chadwick Harrington III scrambled to his feet, stammering meaningless apologies, and practically fled to the back of the plane. Elias Vance sat down in the seat he had paid for, the seat he had been forced to fight for. He fastened his seatbelt, leaned back, and closed his eyes. This time, the silence was his. Utterly and completely his. The aircraft continued its journey through the night, but the atmosphere inside had been permanently altered. A heavy silence now blanketed the first-class cabin, a silence profoundly different from the stately quiet that had preceded it. It was woven from shock, from regret, and from the raw, exposed truth. No one spoke. The only sound were the steady hum of the engines and the nearly inaudible tapping of Maya Lin's fingers on her screen in seat 3B. She was no longer just a passenger. She had become a historian, her thumbs flying as she chronicled the end of the battle for a watching world. A younger flight attendant, one who had remained in the galley throughout the confrontation, timidly approached Elias's seat. With a slightly trembling hand, she placed a glass of water on the small table beside him. "Sir," she whispered, "is there anything else I can get for you?" Elias opened his eyes. He looked at the young woman and saw in her eyes not a fear of power, but a genuine, human respect. He gave a slight nod. "Thank you. This is fine." The small moment of decency in an ocean of cruelty felt like a breath of fresh air. It was a reminder that not every gear in the machine was rusted shut. He didn't drink the water. He turned his head to the window, watching the clouds drift by in the moonlight. He had won, a complete, overwhelming victory. But he felt no elation. Instead, a profound weariness, deeper even than before, settled into his bones. The victory was bitter, for it was born from humiliation he should never have had to endure. He had been forced to wield the power of billions of dollars just to reclaim a right that should have been fundamental, the right to be treated as a human being. As the plane began its descent, the glittering carpet of Los Angeles spread out to the horizon below. Elias wasn't thinking about stock prices or board meetings. He thought of a different, younger Elias, a boy taught by his mother to always keep his head down, to work twice as hard for half the recognition. He thought of all the times he had swallowed injustice, smiled, and walked away, because to get angry would only have confirmed their prejudices. The irony was crushing. He was flying to Los Angeles to attend a charity gala where he was set to announce a $50 million scholarship fund in his parents' name, designed to help underprivileged students of color pursue their dreams. He was trying to build ladders for the next generation to climb, while the very system he sought to improve was trying to pull him down. The plane touched down smoothly on the LAX runway. The familiar announcement from the captain came on, thanking the passengers for flying with them. Tonight, the words sounded hollow. As the plane taxied to the gate and the seatbelt sign switched off, no one rushed to stand up. A strange stillness held the cabin. When the aircraft door finally opened, it wasn't a smiling ground agent who stood at the threshold. It was John Fitzpatrick, the CEO of the airline, a powerful man who now looked 10 years older than he had that morning. His face was strained, his expensive suit looking rumpled under the harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal. Elias slowly stood, adjusting the lapels of his suit jacket. He picked up his briefcase, unhurried. He was the last to leave the first-class cabin. He stepped out and came face-to-face with John Fitzpatrick. "Mr. Vance," John began, his voice hoarse. "On behalf of the entire company, Elias held up a hand, a small but definitive gesture that cut him off. He didn't speak with anger. He spoke with a stark, weary truth, distilled from a lifetime of painful experience. "John," he said, his voice low and clear over the din of the airport. "This was never about a seat. It was about an assumption. The assumption that the color of my skin made me out of place. The assumption that I was a fraud, an intruder. Tonight, that assumption cost your company billions in value and in trust. Money can be earned back. Trust cannot." He didn't wait for a reply. He glanced past the CEO to the crowd of reporters and cameras that had already gathered at a distance. He looked one last time at Maya Lin, who was standing with the other deplaning passengers, and gave her a nod of respect. "Thank you," he said, just loud enough for her to hear. "The truth needs a witness." And then he turned his back on it all. Elias Vance walked alone down the wide airport corridor, heading for the exit. He didn't walk like a conquering hero. He walked like a soldier, leaving one battlefield only to continue a larger, unending war. His back was straight, solitary, and steady, carrying the weight not just of corporation, but of the promise of change. The play was over, but its echo would resonate forever. If this story moved you, help it reach others. Like, share, and subscribe to Story Precious for more tales that deserve to be told.